Okay. So I'm going to be doing chapter reading today, right after I give you kind of an update on what's been going on, because I didn't do one on Wednesday as planned. We are actually moving from our current apartment, just adjusting the camera, sorry, from our current apartment to a new apartment that is directly upstairs. But it's a much bigger apartment, and it requires us to pack everything and move it. So if you were to look around the room right now, you'll notice there's just a blank wall behind me, but there's really nothing in here anymore. So I'm just going to do probably only one chapter, because we've been doing quite a bit this week. And then next week, I hope to get back on a regular Monday, Wednesday, Friday schedule for the live reading. The plays, TH Ball play stuff might not happen for a while I'm sorting out where we're going to be and what we're going to be doing, because I can't play Baldur's Gate at the apartment right now. The computer is elsewhere, so kind of a delay in a couple of things. But we're on chapter 7. Chapter 7 and chapter 8 are fairly long, so I will probably only do one chapter today, and then I will do one on Monday. There's a possibility I'll try to squeeze one in over the weekend to keep it caught up with what was my initial plan of 3 a week. And if so, I'll try to alert people the morning of or sometime during the day so that they know it's coming. But yeah, I'm going to read 7. And then if anybody pops into chat with questions, I will try to answer those. A lot of people have subbed to the channel recently, which is awesome, and thank you. And a lot of people have sent some questions or comments through either Twitch or Facebook or anything else. I'm going to put into chat actually right now my email for purposes of anyone who wants to reach me with questions, or if you would like to be part of the newsletter. I use that email that I've just put into chat. The newsletter comes out once a month and basically lets you know, here's what I've been able to complete so far with the 3rd book, and here's what's been going on, and just gives you a general update on a few things. And the newsletter will eventually start containing like PDF versions of chapters, like basically a preview of the 3rd book, sections of the 3rd book, whenever I get myself to the point where I have something I want to stick out there. So, and it's also just a good way to contact me if you don't want to use Twitch or YouTube to do it. All the videos should be up on YouTube now through chapter 6. I believe. I'll double check that after this, because I'm probably going to upload 7 tonight at some point or tomorrow. So everything should be good to go. So we're moving on to chapter 7 of The Sword. Again, you can get this on Amazon. If you just search T.H. Paul and the Legacy Chronicle, you should be able to find the entire series. You can get both books in paperback or Kindle, and there are Kindle sales that happen periodically. I'm probably going to start one sometime in August, but I haven't decided yet for sure. All right, chapter 7. Oh, recap. Probably should have done that. So in the last chapter, chapter 6, we learned that Ghost is fleeing. So, Trem and Joven meet a number of characters in the Inn of the Four Winds in Gyla-Kill. They meet Ghost, who is a northerner fleeing the war that claimed the Napoleon Empire. They meet Diaga and his fire cat, Neep, who is an anthropomorphic cat that can walk on its hind legs and use weapons. Diaga is a wizard, an actual wizard, not just a illusionist or entertainer. And then Logan and Grimtooth, who are both from Angladeus, a very pious kingdom in the west of Legotia. And they have not been home in several years, and learned from Diaga that their homeland is essentially sealed off from accessing the rest of the continent by a fortress that magically appeared. The chapter ends with Ghost being attacked by shadowy figures that enter the inn. The others jump to his aid, and he determines that they ought to come with him since they're going to be hunted anyway, safety in numbers. He has convinced Joven, at least, that he has access to information, or might be able to help Joven find information on his missing father. In exchange, Ghost wants them to go south with him to pick up a package. He has not specified anything further about what that is. The other chapter that's going to be relevant is the end of chapter 5, where after Raymir and Edge escape Castle Bane. There's a knife strike at Edge's head that ends the chapter, which is where we pick up chapter 7. So the dagger descended onto the back of Edge's head faster than Raymir could react. Hilt first, it struck the base of his skull, knocking him out instantly. Before his body had sprawled on the cold stone of the cavern floor, Raymir was already moving, rushing the man crouched over the one person she had left in the world. Weaponless, she dove at him, trying desperately to pin him while screaming unintelligible threats in his face. The man was thoroughly stunned. He had seen the girl perform a few magic spells, but this strange elf had seemed to far surpass her in potential danger. As she tried to get her hands around his neck, he quickly tossed his dagger aside, not wanting to stab her accidentally. Grabbing her firmly by the shoulders, he flipped her over easily, and by straddling her back and pressing her arms down, he was able to hold her in place. He had already sustained a few bruises to his face, and was in no mood to suffer more. "Come on, miss, just relax for a minute. I'm not going to hurt you or your young man. I need to ask him some questions without the risk of him attacking me, if they are ones he doesn't like. I need to make sure he's really on my side." Raymir stopped struggling and stared fiercely at her captor over her shoulder. And what side would that be? Feeling her relax just a bit, he smiled and said, "The Resistance. I'm a servant of the city of Hethagar. If I let you sit up, can I tell you my story without worrying about another assault?" Raymir paused a moment to consider the offer, then nodded. She reasoned that if he had not simply executed Edge right away, he must not be one of Hrothgar's assassins or loyal to Wolfbane's cause. Otherwise, what would have been the point? No, if he wanted them dead, he would have killed them both already. Listening to him could not hurt, and if his story proved false, she was prepared to go back on her word, using a few more tricks from her time in Nepal City's castle library. Accepting Raymir's promise, the servant eased himself off of her back and stepped away, hands held palms outward and maintaining a reassuring smile. It was a smile that calmed Raymir as she sat up to meet his eyes. The man cleared his throat. "First of all, my name is Romand of Hethagar, and I was sent by the remnants of the House Hethagar, still loyal to the memory of the late Thane Fernal, to infiltrate the Narathian army and learn what I could of their greater plans. The Thane's wife gave me this." He held up a thin chain of silver to which was attached a small amulet of narrow bronze wires that surrounded a glowing crystal. "This is a mirage, a special elven amulet that lets a person alter his or her appearance for as long as they choose, though the change is limited. I couldn't have become another person entirely, as convenient as that would have been. Once a mirage is activated, it can only be removed by the wearer, and once removed, it can never be reactivated." Raymir nodded in understanding. "Your arm, you made it appear as though you lost it." Roman nodded, grinning. "It was a rather obvious solution once I came to it. No one hires a one-armed man to become a soldier. When I reached the border of the Whitewood near Nepal City, I activated the enchantment and siled the bulk of the Narathian army. I made up a story about having served as an armorer and soldier before I lost my arm hunting. The Narathians are not stupid. They know if several of their soldiers are former Napoleons who simply want a good, solid job with coin, honest work or not. So I convinced them after a time that my mending skills were worth placement in the fortress, patching up armor for leaders and the elite soldiers. People never think much of servants. They say a lot of things they should not in front of them. There I learned of the attack that was being plotted in the Northwest Tower last night. Not the specifics, mind, but enough to know something big is beginning to happen into the south. The raids over the next few days on border towns are merely a distraction. I had to get out of the fortress and reach my people, or those elsewhere if necessary, and warn them before it was too late. But getting out was far more difficult than getting in. Any soldier or servant that fled the fortress was rounded up quickly and executed. I needed a fail-safe way to get out, one where they would not follow me. Then I saw your young friend there, knew him from before, knew he was high-ranking and could tell from his face he was looking for an escape. I offered to help him as discreetly as I could, figuring he must know a safe exit and betting I could beg to be taken along. Never figured he would get himself in a fight, though. What was he doing? Trying to kill the general. They were friends once. Wolfbane trained Edge in his youth. He made him into a fine fighter. Raymir shook her head sadly. Edge had to watch him go from an honorable man to an evil tyrant. He thought I could convince him to flee with us, but something went wrong. I don't know what. Maybe Wolfbane tried to make him stay, or maybe one of the guards found him before he could explain. Whatever happened, he must have fought his way clear somehow. Roman watched the gaze of the young girl drift from him to the unconscious man on the cavern floor. There was such love and devotion in that look, for a moment Roman sharply regretted knocking him out. I had to be sure, though, he thought. One can never be too careful, especially with strangers. To Raymir he said, I am sorry I hit him, but I had to be sure he was against Wolfbane. It was risky leaving him in a position to kill me when I'd just gotten free. Raymir managed a slight smile. I understand. You did not have to hurt Edge, though. I'm a Napoleon myself, and I trust him. He and I were intending to go north and hide until the war ended. Well, that was Edge's plan. I'm not so sure that's enough for me. The Narathians have taken my home and my family. I've been looking for a way to strike back since the fall of the city. I worked in the library of the castle helping the wizards, and something I found in Saltillion's notes struck me as quite odd. Roman became curious. How did you access his notes? My role in the library was tending to their books and other needs. Saltillion was scatterbrained. He left a lot of handwritten papers strewn about. I found one, written in shorthand and hard to decipher, but there was something about breeding, arcane vessel, and Deirvaron's connections. It had a lot of ramblings on a place called Twisted Spire, and there was a history book on a woman from the ancient times called Istraine Cutwave, who supposedly learned how to prevent her own death. It was very strange, but from what I understood, it seems Deirvaron was communicating with someone from this Twisted Spire about some undertaking to aid the invaders. Saltillion seemed very interested in the Frozen Reach and someplace west of the Gulf of Thunder and Mount Iceblade. He kept asking me how one would most easily cross the wastelands north of Shearwater Cove. It sounded like he intended to find this Twisted Spire and learn for himself what Deirvaron was up to. Roman rubbed his chin thoughtfully. That shall certainly have to take some consideration, but I think we should first wake up your young man and see what he suggests. If you wish to go on your way, I will not stop you, but I need to know what happened to him this night, and anything else you can tell me about the Nerathian plans. Raymir, now considerably confident in the man's honesty, nodded agreeably. I will wake him up for you, probably safer. Roman's smile shone. Probably, miss. Raymir moved swiftly to Edge's side, removing his pack and weapons. She leaned them against the wall of the cavern before taking his head gently in her hands. The dagger had left a nasty lump on the back of his skull, but the fair white hair showed there was no sign of blood. Roman had indeed been careful to do only as much damage as necessary. Stroking his hair softly, Raymir murmured one of the few healing spells she'd found in Saltillion's books. The mage had been far more interested in the schools of ruination and degeneration than those that might have helped people. Still, Raymir was confident she could do something about this fairly minor injury. A soft glow emanated from her hands as Raymir pressed them on Edge's temples. In front of Roman's eyes, he watched the man begin breathing more rapidly, and finally gasp as he regained consciousness. The lump now gone, Roman was impressed. He had known few mages in his time, but enough to recognize the girl was certainly a novice, though a decidedly skilled one. He suspected she could become very powerful in time. As Edge sat sharply up, his green eyes went from a dull to a sudden sparking rage. He spun, not realizing Raymir was still holding him, and locked on to Roman. The man had a sharp jolt of fear and actually thought of diving for one of the short swords in the cavern floor before Raymir restrained Edge. Relax, he's on our side, Edge, I promise. The glaring look lessened only slightly at first, but as Roman and Raymir jointly explained Roman's story, Edge became calmer in stages, though he still kept his eyes on Roman. Finally, he stood gingerly and looked hard at the man before him. Edge took in the aged but rugged features, the strong arms and shoulders, the glint of experience and confidence in his eyes, with just a hint of mischief. Edge extended his hand, and Roman took it, smiling reassuringly. We are of one mind, young sir. I apologize for doubting your character. Perhaps you would explain how you came to us so battered and rushed. Edge seemed to snap out of his reflection as the events that had preceded the cave came back to him. Sitting down once more, he gestured for the other two to join him. Raymir staying close, her hand on his. In a quiet and troubled voice, he described his journey into the castle, becoming more and more furious as he related the battle with Deirvaron and the guards, at last ending the tale with his flight back to the house in the caverns. When he was done, he sat back and squeezed his eyes shut and said quietly, I never even got the chance to turn him, not even an opportunity to say goodbye. I know he's different now, but once he was like a father I never had. Roman grasped the boy's arm in reassurance. You did all you could. Wolfbane would never have left, not even for you. He's in the full sway of Narath in his vision of our world. We can do no more for him. If he breaks free, it will be from his own determination, not ours. There are other things we must take care of now. Edge looked hard at the man who was rapidly gaining respect for. What is it you propose that we do? Roman stood inside, turning his back to them and running his hand through his hair. He seemed slightly unsure of what to say next, but finally he turned, and after glancing at the floor of the cavern for a moment, nodded and said, You're both young, and you've been through much already. Raymir seems to know the lay of the land around here well enough. Your chances of fleeing the region safely are probably quite good. I would love to join you, or even return to Hethegar, but Raymir's other news, that of this Twisted Spire, I cannot ignore. If somewhere in that tower is a cohort of Deirvarons helping formulate something that will sway the tide of battle even more in Wolfbane's favor, I must go and find it, and at the least find out what undertaking it is, and prevent its completion if I can. He shook his head, looking desperate but determined all at once. I do not know if I can even find this place, but if it lies north of the Frozen Reach, I may find someone in the mountains who can aid me. Edge looked at Roman thoughtfully. Little did the older man realize what he was proposing was madness. When Wolfbane and Edge had originally landed on Legotia 2 years ago, they had been in the Frozen Reach region, a vast stretch of wind, ice, and snow northwest of the Dragonscale Mountains. The journey with over 10,000 men and wagons had been one of constant danger, from rabid wolves and their larger, fiercer cousins known as wargs, to the biting cold air and freezing nights. They had only managed to bypass the mountains alive because Deravron had found them amid the swirling snow and brought them by fleet through the edge of the Gulf of Thunder to the town of Crestwind, using his immense arcane power to hold off gales and crashing waves. The act of keeping the army alive had exhausted him, but without his magic, Edge was certain they would have perished entirely. What Roman wanted to do was noble, and Edge was intrigued as to what Deravron was up to as well, but he could not fathom the task he was setting before himself. Edge had Raymir to think about. She had made it this far on her quick wits and skill with minor magic, but a journey north, even for a native Napoleon, would be far too dangerous. Edge could not believe he was thinking of making the venture himself, but simultaneously he could not just let this older man, who had, intentions aside, helped to get them safely out of Castle Bane, go into untold danger without someone to watch his back. At least Edge knew something of the land they would be traveling through. He could take Raymir back to Glaciar first. Her grandfather still held some authority there. Algathor Squall could shelter her until they came back, if they did. Most importantly, Edgewolf Elvak felt a great need to atone for his part in the fall of the Napoleon Empire. At the very least, this quest would give Edge a chance to do something in repayment for his missteps with the Nerathians. Edge looked at Raymir. She stared back, saw the truth in his eyes, and sadly nodded. She knew they had to help this man. They needed to do something about the current state of affairs in the land. Wolfbane's total conquest could not continue unchecked. Even if Edge failed to shake the foundations of his army, he might still hinder the plans of Deravron. Raymir hugged him tightly and pressed her face into his shoulder. Sitting there on the ground with her held tight, he thought of how lucky he was to have the most beautiful woman in the world to himself. He also thought how terrible things could become for both of them. For them both, if Wolfbane continued to sweep unabated across the world. Stroking her hair, he looked at Roman, who still stood, hands on his hips, now facing the interior stream on the cavern slope. Now that he truly studied the man, Edge saw the years weighing his shoulders. The grayness of his hair was more apparent. The stoop was clearer, and he wondered how he'd not noticed it before. This man must have his help. Edge gently took Raymir's hands from him and with great care placed her slowly on the floor as she had fallen asleep. He paused, looking at her red curls and soft, innocent face. Raymir should not have to live the rest of her life in fear. Edge rummaged through their supplies and pulled forth a bedroll that had fallen out of his pack, placing it over Raymir to keep her warm. Assured that she was all right for the moment, he turned and walked somewhat stiffly to Roman's side. Roman was still studying the stream in front of him, his eyes rapidly following the flowing water. Edge knelt and cupped his hands, drinking some of the icy liquid before standing and addressing Roman in a calm but self-assured tone. You cannot find the place you seek on your own, Roman. It's simply not possible for someone who is unfamiliar with the frozen reach and its dangers. You are going to need my assistance to get anywhere, and even then, I don't know if we will survive long. It may be late fall, but in Nepal, winter is eternal. Roman looked at him, surprise clear on his haggard face. You can't do this. Raymir needs you. You both have long lives in front of you. I'm not going to let you throw them away for a crazy old man's desperate gambit. Ed shook his head. This is no trivial thing you seek to do. This is a blow to the enemy, to the fiends I've been so blind as to assist in their conquest of this land. I cannot sit idle while that happens. If I take you north, I give myself a chance at redemption. Roman inclined his chin in the direction of the blissful sleeper. And what about her? What has she to say about this matter? I'll take you willingly, Edge. You're obviously a warrior and trained in the art of combat, but she's just a young woman with a few mystical tricks. She does not have the instinct to last in the wild for as long as we may be there. You cannot get her involved. I know. She will not be. Raymir still has kin in Glaciar. Her grandfather is a respected man there, although he's fallen on hard times. He can keep her safe within his estate. Ed glanced over the man he had chosen to ally himself with. Besides, he said, smiling slightly, you already admitted you're an old man. A young counterpart might keep you alive a little longer. Roman smiled and clapped the youth on his back. Another pair of eyes never hurts. I'd be glad to have you along. The two walked back to the cavern wall where Raymir still slept. Edge pulled out 2 bedrolls from the packs Raymir and Roman had brought. Tossing one to his companion, he said, as good as you are with a dagger, you might find a sword more useful. Take one of them. Roman complied, pulling free one of the battered blades and its scabbard, and along with the bedroll offered to him, he retired to one end of the cavern. Edge left the other sword next to Raymir. It was small enough she might be able to wield it if it should come to that. He intended to keep her free from danger if possible, but he was not naive. Edge took his bedroll and settled against the wall next to Raymir, keeping his halberd resting on his right shoulder where he could reach it easily. Edge no longer suspected foul play from Roman, who was already snoring loudly at his end of the cavern, but he was also a careful man. Wrapping his bedroll around his shoulders against the evening cold, Edge closed his eyes. He was tired, but his years of campaigning had taught him to keep his other senses active while asleep. If anything changed in the cavern that he could hear, smell, or feel, Edge would be alerted instantly. Wolfbane had trained him well. In the soft calm of the cavern, Edgewolf Elvok finally accepted the loss of his friend and guardian, Wolfbane. From now on, Edge would have to make his own way in the world, and at least he would not have to start his journey alone. There was little weeping over the loss of Edge at Castlebane. Deravron had spent the remainder of the night in meditation to restore what magical energy he'd expended during his battle with the escaped Lost Elf. The fearsome wizard was not in a pleasant mood, not that he ever was, but his general attitude had become even darker. The fact that Edge had escaped the manservant and, more importantly, the young woman who had worked in the library with he and Saltillion, bothered Deravron deeply. Remer had never gotten close to his personal files or records, as he kept them in the dungeons where he conducted his most serious work, but Saltillion was well known as a meddler, and could be counted on to leave potentially valuable information lying around. While Deravron was certain that whatever Saltillion had left available to the girl was of no consequence, the idea of her escaping with knowledge of anything contained in the library enraged him. So Deravron rested in a deep trance for several hours, coming out of his static state just before dawn. With the sun still down in the west, he decided to make a connection with his god Neroth, informing him of recent events that may have passed unnoticed. Deravron's runners had arrived during his meditation, and the silent messenger Lolanas had left him a simple note from his Nightcloak captain. It had not been pleasing, but neither was it entirely terrible news. The one he sought had evaded his minions' clutches in Gyla-Kill, but was now traveling in rather large company, and one that would be easier to track. While he had not succeeded in capturing his quarry, he knew that he would not evade him much longer. Patience Deravron had. He only hoped Neroth would share his view. Walking down the dismal hallway to his summoning chamber, Deravron mused over what else Neroth would need information on. The god of death would likely order the pursuit of Edgewolf Elvok for practical purposes, though with Edge no longer arguing against Deravron's counsel, the overthrow of Wolfbane's mine should become more complete. As for the other tasks he had left to his disciple, Deravron had all but accomplished 2 of them. It was the mysterious second individual, not the one the Nightcloaks were now stalking on the road from Gyla-Kill, which continued to utterly evade him. The whereabouts of his target had been narrowed down to Silverleaf Forest, or perhaps the region of Dragon's Watch, but little else was known. If Deravron's target had chosen to remain secluded and in exile from others, then the necessary depth of investigation could not really commence without the removal of the Eagle Knights, the Foresters, and the Order of the Blade, all of which would take time. But Wolfbane was clever, and his broken allies were moving swiftly toward their goal of becoming a fully functional and disciplined army. The mass assault on western Lagotia should begin soon. Deravron ran his hand along the ancient stone walls of the dungeon hall. Unlike the rest of the castle, the dungeon was very, very old. When first he had found this place, long before leading Wolfbane's army south, it had been a mere staircase under the castle, disappearing into the earth and expanding into a massive underground labyrinth so huge as to seem limitless. It was here that he had discovered prison quarters and rooms for his use as a private library, alchemical lab, and study. The deepest level of the dungeon was completely abandoned, and only the ancient casting chamber there was Deravron's to hold total sway over. Neroth had forbidden the revived wizard from wandering anywhere else, and Deravron had not truly relished the thought of going beyond the confines of his workspace. It would be too easy, even for him, to become lost in such a massive nest of tunnels. Deravron took the stairs down to the deepest level and strode up to the metal door with the summoning chamber. With a mere wave of his hand coupled with a few precise movements of his fingers, he undid the 5 locks and several wards on the door. As it swung easily open, he stepped forward into the chamber. It was large and circular, perhaps 20 yards in diameter. At its center stood a circle of red paint dotted with many blue runes. Before it stood a smaller white circle with a few green runes in its circumference. Deravron approached the smaller circle and entered it. Casting some powdered bone into the larger circle, he chanted softly, forming the connection between the world of the gods and that of the mortals. This would allow Neroth to enter Teth Tanir, though he would be confined to the circle that had been created for him. The great task that had been laid before Deravron when he entered Neroth's services had been to rediscover the secrets of forming these summoning circles, a feat long ago abandoned by wizards of ancient days. In the past, the gods had been able to come to Teth Tanir still immortal, flush with the power of their worshippers and their own immense strength. Yet some time ago, after the Arcane Wars and during an event Deravron had heard referred to as the Immorbellum, the ability to reach Teth Tanir had been lost to the gods. He did not understand how it was possible, nor was he so foolish as to ask Neroth to explain. When he had begun working for the god of death, Deravron had learned to make smaller, weaker circles for Neroth to project himself into. Now he could bring his full strength to the one in Nepal City, but the secret to allowing Neroth to break free of the confining ring and return to the mortal world still evaded Deravron. On one hand, he hated not knowing how to accomplish a feat of invocation magic, but on the other, the study necessary to gradually break down the barriers between the worlds was tedious and uninteresting to him. Deavron neared the end of the ritual, the wall sconces erupting in a shimmering blue flame, then receding slightly, to burn steadily in the background and illuminate the chamber. As the chant ceased, a large black cloud billowed up from the floor and spread slowly, filling the room. As the smoky substance faded, a figure became visible. He was gaunt yet muscled, wrapped in flowing black robes. A sword hilt of fearsome, jagged steel, with a fine leather scabbard, could be glimpsed from under the folds of waving silken cloth. This was the god of death, and to mere mortals his image sprayed fear like blood from a wound. But this apparition did not affect Deavron as it might others, for he was not frozen at the mere sight of his master. Upon being given his existence, such as it was, back, Deavron no longer felt true fear, though at this moment he felt a heightened sense of awareness. While he was relatively confident he knew of no opponent who could defeat him, Narath was something else entirely. Deavron knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that if he desired, even in his ethereal form, Narath could rip the life he'd given Deavron from him in the blink of an eye. Narath's eyes were his greatest power. From the drapes of his hood, two gleaming black orbs shone, and now Deavron felt a spike of unease, but it passed, eventually. What news of the mortal world? Deavron's mind swayed with strange detachment as the power of the god undulated against the barrier of the circle. His strength had increased greatly since their last meeting, only a few weeks prior. Narath appeared more solidly before him now, a sure sign his ability to bring more of himself into the mortal world was increasing. Deavron touched the cloth over his ruined face and spoke. There's much that has changed, my lord. The youth, Edgewolf Elvak, has fled the castle with his mistress and a one-armed servant. I failed in my attempt to slay him, but he did not have a chance to turn Wolfbane's mind against our efforts. I saw to it. Wolfbane's loyalty is not a concern, Narath shifted slightly, and your failure is not great in this matter. Better you'd killed Edgewolf, but he has little hope of causing our mission any harm, trapped in the North Sea is. What of this twisted spire? Was Valroth successful in the first phase of his experiments? Deavron nodded confidently. Our associate has done well. He claims that the fusing has been completed, and now the training will begin. He fears the powers of the creation may extend farther than we could hope to contain without your support here, but he will teach him what he can. This is good. If we succeed in this venture, then it will be due to your strength of will and cunning, Deavron. Valroth is not easily swayed to do anyone's bidding. Deavron scowled defiantly. He's not as hard to break as one might think. This you've proven true enough. Deavron cleared his throat, eager to make his report return to matters more of interest to him. As to the issue of the targets you asked me to locate and deal with, the Night Cloaks trapped one into the south, but found he had aid in the form of several formidable allies. They fled Gailakill last night. I've sent more of their kind to join them and further the attempt to end his life before he brings you further trouble. I received word the Night Cloaks intend to push him and his new associates east, where the Shades or the Broken can dispatch them against the eastern foothills and edge of Silverleaf as they continue to pillage farther south. Drive them east and have the Night Cloaks make contact with the Broken Army. Use the raids south to trap them against the woods of Silverleaf, but tell your spectral hunter and his followers not to expose themselves to the enemy unless they must. I do not wish to reveal the full extent of our might so soon. What of the other I seek? Have you learned nothing? Deavron shifted uncomfortably. I fear I still have no word. No scouts have been able to thoroughly explore Dragon's Watch region due to patrols of knights and forester elves. Perhaps once the Broken take the region, this is not acceptable. I have no time to wait for Wolfbane's puppets to complete this task, which is why it fell to you. Drive those from Gailakill east and trap them, but do not neglect our second target. I can sense him again, though he strives to hide himself from me. He represents a far greater foe and potential ally than the first. Find this other, or I will place my trust in someone more capable of doing my bidding. And thus Narath evaporated suddenly, sucking the light out of the room in his departure, leaving Deavron alone and squeezing his dead hands tightly. His fear of the god of death was impossible, yet something gripped him in that moment. Deavron had to find the other mortal, or Narath would surely cease to reward his efforts. The god of death had made it clear that the invasion was secondary to the discovery and elimination of these two threats he seemed so wary of. Frustrated and on edge, Deavron departed quickly, slamming the door shut and snapping the locks into place with the sweep of his departing hand. He bounded up the stairs in a rage, violent in his indignation at his own weakness. In his study he found Lolanas, the mute elf, waiting for him. Glaring at him, he barked, "What is it?" The elf signed hurriedly that Wolfbane had requested his presence in the war room immediately. Deavron went into a blind rage. He requests me. I'll make him grovel on bended knee before this war is through, and then he'll come crawling at my decree. As he howled his last statement, he shot his gauntleted hand out and grasped Lolanas's unprotected neck. Bringing the elf's face closer to his, he hissed, "All of them will. Every last one." Deavron accented each word by squeezing the elf's neck tighter, until his throat simply collapsed and his lifeless body hung limp in the mage's hand. Deavron let Lolanas fall to the stones of the dungeon floor and sat in his chair, staring at the volumes on his desk. 100 lifetimes to acquire all the knowledge in the world, and he had but cracked the surface of its secrets. Slamming his fist down, Deavron split the sturdy table in two and whirled out of his seat, snatching his dark purple cloak from the hook on the wall, along with his most regal silk scarf. Wrapping this around his decomposed face and hurling the cloak over his shoulder, he stormed up the stairs and collected himself at the trapdoor to the fortress. Stepping up and tossing the hidden door open, he seemed to appear in the central hall of Castle Bane, just as a terrified servant was passing by. Without looking, Deavron reached out his gloved, still partially whole hand and caught his tunic. "There is a mess downstairs I want you to take care of, right now." He waved his free hand to dismiss the illusion hiding the entry to the stairs below. "Go." The servant took off, glad to be free of the fearsome mage, and Deavron marched to the war room. Once again, Deavron found himself the last arrival at the meeting this day, noting with some satisfaction the empty seat that had once been Edge's. This time, Wolfbane did not wait for him to sit down. He rose as soon as the mage entered and growled, "Where is Edge, dead one? I hear he fought with you, while I slept." Felissa could not be held back either. "One of my guards is dead, and a servant is missing. What happened, mage?" Caramon looked on with mild interest, while Hrothgar and Saltillion remained meekly silent, though Saltillion leaned forward as though interested in how Deavron would respond. Deavron thought how pleasant it would be to tear the man's bones from his legs and pin him to a wall with them. Crossing his arms, he faced Wolfbane. "We did indeed battle in this very chamber, my lord, where I chose to guard you so you might rest peacefully and safely. Edwulf Elvok came here with the intent of murdering you as you slept. It seems he foolishly sympathized with the Napoleons who oppose you. I believe he escaped with my young librarian and this missing servant." That response brought Wolfbane slumping back into his chair and silenced the others in the room. Saltillion sat back in his chair as well and rubbed his chin, now looking far less pleased with himself than before. Satisfied, Deavron sat in his own seat and waited for Wolfbane's reaction. There would naturally be some grief at learning his beloved ward had deserted him, and more so after hearing he tried to kill him first. What a hindrance emotions could be, thought Deavron, conveniently forgetting his own bout of unease only a few minutes before. Wolfbane shook his head and looked up, clearly shocked at the news. It was far easier to believe that Edge had been driven out by a foul mage across from him, an ally whom he utterly mistrusted. Such a revelation as mutiny was hard to swallow. But he made a decision then and there, one that Deavron would not like, and also had no choice but to support. Straightening, he glared directly across the table at the wizard as he made his announcement. "We will have to hunt him down to learn the truth. If indeed his intent was what you say it was, we shall treat him like any other traitor. If not, well, then the circumstances change dramatically. Don't you agree?" Deavron stiffened, but kept his composure. "Indeed?" Wolfbane smiled dangerously. "Then it's settled. I would search for the lad myself, but I am needed to command our mission of conquest from the fortress. Hrothgar, you have your responsibilities to the south. I imagine you intend to leave today." Hrothgar sat up, surprised to be included in the meeting. "I move when you say, my liege." "I say, you go now. Bring you several of your men with you, perhaps a score or two. Gather the broken army together in the northeast and steer them south through the farmlands, then west towards the home of the Eagle Knights. We'll cut off the three western kingdoms by taking their central and most easily defended point, the fortress of Aves. That should prevent you from meeting any truly formidable defensive effort. How long do you expect the campaign to last?" Hrothgar sat even straighter, realizing he was suddenly being treated as important. "Difficult to say, my lord, but if I were to estimate, then I would guess at perhaps 2 or 3 weeks to unite the broken from across their scattered clans, and another 4 or 5 to move them all west. Then naturally a few days afterward to array our plans and coordinate the attack." Hrothgar realized his estimation might not please Wolfbane, and he tried to correct course. "I might be able to spur them on faster, my lord, perhaps with more men." "No," Wolfbane shook his head. "A month or 2 is not long, Hrothgar, and the Eagle Knights have made no move to bring their forces to bear now. I doubt they will suddenly be driven to do so in the weeks to come. The fools are still too suspicious of the Order of the Blade and Foresters to desert their one stronghold on the coast, even if the east is virtually under siege." Hrothgar seemed to relax. "Then 40-odd men should suffice, if I may have my own choosing?" Wolfbane nodded his assent. "You may. Leave immediately and get eastward as quickly as you can. Find our contact among the broken, and get him behind you. The others should join quickly after that." Hrothgar stood and placed fist to heart. "For the god of death I shall do this. Safe be your crown, Lord Wolfbane." Wolfbane dismissed him in the ceremonial phrases with a wave of a huge hand. Hrothgar departed swiftly, intent on accomplishing his mission as soon as he could. Wolfbane now rounded on Deavron, pointing one massive finger at him as he addressed the mage. "You will go to Marlpaz and ensure that her defenses are in order." Deavron's eyes narrowed, and he was ready to protest, but Wolfbane rolled over him. and you shall stay there until you are certain that the Anglo-Daix pose no threat. If it takes a day or a year, do not test me, sorcerer. At this stage, the great Narath still prizes my skills in war over yours in wizardry. Deavron forced himself to yield, though the urge to hurl a bolt of fire at the man across from him was strong. Wolfbane was his commanding superior, or was intended to believe so. The god of death would look foully on any action taken against him, and Deavron doubted he could have defeated him and the other three on his own, even if they were caught off guard. He was more inclined to strike from the shadows, and he could wait to kill Wolfbane. In the meantime, the trip to Marlpaz would not be a disastrous move for him. It would be easy to reach his Anglo-Daic contact there, and see how plans for the nation were progressing. Yes, a trip there would give Wolfbane time to forget his suspicions, and let Deavron plan a bit. This was acceptable. Wolfbane was now silent, seemingly deep in thought. Finally, he rumbled to life, his chin resting on his hands. Velissa, you must go with Hrothgar. Keep me informed on the troops, and be sure to watch for relations with the Broken. We need them. Crush any resistance you find, though there should be little. I would bet against any trouble at all, but then I'm no gambler. Also, bring as many of your own soldiers as you need, and make certain that fool doesn't mar negotiations with the Broken. I'd prefer to use them against the armies in Dragon's Watch over my own men. Velissa looked displeased, but merely nodded her consent. Wolfbane eyed Caramon Aerophos briefly, rubbing his beard in thought. I could send you to find Edge, or to the south to assist Velissa and Hrothgar, but neither seems necessary. No, you may remain here for now, Caramon, and assure things run smoothly as we assimilate the last remnants of the Napoleon Empire into our new kingdom. Caramon dipped his head in acquiescence. Wolfbane now rounded on the final member of the council. Saltillion, you are the only one that does not serve a much greater need to me, here or elsewhere. I charge you with finding Edgewolf Elvak and the servants he escaped with. I care not for them, but he must be brought back alive so I can deduce precisely what happened. Understand, if he comes back injured beyond what I deem necessary, you shall receive the same, even if Deavron has to administer the beating himself. Do you follow me well enough? Saltillion seemed unsure of himself and the sudden responsibility being foisted upon him. Usually, he was left alone during the meetings. It was out of order to even hear him speak more than once or twice. At the mention of Deavron, he paled considerably, but rapidly seemed to regain his backbone. I, Lord Wolfbane, I can find him for you, and have no fear. I will return him unhurt, I swear it. Wolfbane gave him a considering stare and then dropped the matter. See that you do. You are all dismissed. Go about your tasks immediately. I will not tolerate sluggishness in these matters. They are of the utmost importance. There was no formal intonation during the departure. Everyone merely stood and left. Velissa Ulfrin delayed briefly, trying to gain Wolfbane's ear, but when he ignored her, she flew down the stairs past the others in a huff. Deavron had no doubt some loudmouth soldier was in for a painful meeting when she crossed him. In the meantime, the wizard thought he might enjoy laying into a passing servant himself, for his fury was immense. Wolfbane had more than undermined his authority. He had opened the door for Saltillion to poke around in his other affairs without Deavron to keep a watchful eye on him. The dread wizard fumed, but held it in. Whatever Saltillion uncovered, Deavron was certain that he would die before Wolfbane learned any of it. He was determined the man would not make it back to Castle Bane, still breathing. Saltillion was unaware of any threat to his person. The timid mage was too giddy with joy and shock to pay attention to the smoldering fire in Deavron's dead eyes. He could not believe that he now had the ideal opportunity to inspect the project Deavron's notes had hinted at. It had taken Saltillion nearly 3 months, stealing one page at a time, when he was assured it could be returned before Deavron noticed it was missing. Those few moments with the sheets and their cold, spidery handwriting had been enough to learn much. Saltillion was not foolish enough to think he could directly cross Deavron. He knew the other mage was far too powerful for him. What he wanted to do was eliminate him and obtain his tomes on ancient magic, something Deavron was supposed to have a great deal of knowledge about. To do that, Saltillion needed Wolfbane on his side, but that would only happen with proof that Deavron was plotting behind his back. Saltillion had finally acquired the first clue towards that proof, and now had the good fortune to be granted the means to examine it. Back in his room on the library floor, a smiling Saltillion leafed through his reams of notes, looking for the one blank sheet that was more precious than any. Saltillion's room was a small one, cluttered to the point of ridiculousness with scrolls, books, and scraps of paper. Only half his bed remained cleared. He had trained himself to lie perfectly still so as not to disturb the stacks of tomes at his feet. Saltillion lusted for knowledge as other men lusted after beautiful women, though in the case of Raymir Squall he had made an exception. Truthfully, while he was thrilled to be given the chance to investigate the dark machinations of Deavron, the opportunity to lay claim to Raymir was almost as enticing. He had watched her since the first day she came to the castle. He admired the curvature of her body and the delicate sheen of her skin, longing to know it better. Now he would, and he could finally put the frustrations of the past behind him. Saltillion's time at the library fortress in Osmandius had led him to believe that no one had more arcane wisdom than Deravron, not even the reigning High Wizard Cathal. Saltillion's training as a mage had been harsh and unforgiving, but he had rapidly outdistanced all his fellow students except for one young boy who had been there for a time before Saltillion left. This rival had been the most powerful mage in many ages and instantly became Cathal's new favorite, but the child had not believed, as the High Wizard did, that the arcane practitioners of their time should be preparing for some sort of cataclysmic war. Eventually, Saltillion's rival, whose name he could now not quite recall, had left the school of his own accord, allowing Saltillion to curry favor with Cathal once again, though he never gained access to the most precious books he sought in the fortress. But soon they would be his, once Wolfbane's army took the City of Magic along with the rest of the continent. Very little was important when placed next to Saltillion's aspirations of power and wealth. Long had he lusted after the great fame and admiration of others, ever since he'd been a lone child in the streets of Nepal City. His younger days had been harsh, sold by his own northern family to another Nepaalian household as a slave and servant, far from his home in Lowwinter, unwanted by his parents who could not or would not accept another mouth to feed. He had escaped his baleful purchasers and was forced to fend for himself in the city. Without friend or family, he'd sought aid from those in Nepal City that were charged with helping the less fortunate, and in repayment of his trust, he had been violently abused in the streets and engaged in many unscrupulous practices before learning he had a gift for the arcane. That aptitude resulted in him being driven out of the north and finding his way to Osmandius, where his ability was fostered and grew. His increasing sense of power was all directed towards one goal: revenge on those who had wronged him. When Raymir Squall had come to the castle, he had added her to a list of planned conquests, and now he only needed to track her and Deravron's correspondent down to get what he sought. Rummaging through his papers, he finally found what he was looking for. Saltillion smiled into the sheet of blank parchment in his hand. He had learned a few useful tricks for stealing information in his time in Osmandius, and this was still his favorite, because it was difficult to detect and impossible to unveil unless one knew the command word. Saltillion uttered his with relish: Alk-Avar. The paper glowed softly, and words began to appear like glowing embers on the sheet. Gradually they hardened and solidified until Saltillion's triumphant clue stood glaring at him from the paper. Saltillion had copied precisely Deravron's spidery hand to the blank sheet, and had sealed the knowledge from view to the naked eye. He had pored over this parchment many times before, but now that he could make use of its words, he studied them with fiercer focus than ever. Sweeping several large stacks of books carelessly from his lone chair, he sat and began to devour the contents of the document in front of him. It said very little outright. Deravron had written almost entirely in his own unusual shorthand, and clearly with great haste, which seemed odd for someone who had centuries of time to gather knowledge and wisdom. Saltillion focused in on the one passage so vital to his intents, and began picking it apart. The creation of a vessel that could absorb such an essence appears, on first study, an impossibility. My duties here give me no opportunities for such an undertaking, but he claims there lies, farther in the north and therefore within the grasp of the Twisted Spire, one of the few entities that could be used in such an attempt. From there, the matter of creation can become one more of alteration, the transforming of tissue as well as soul into another being entirely. The passage went on some more about the possible deterrents and obstacles to the vaguely described experiment, but did not contain enough to prove Deravron was conspiring to create something he would use to take command of Neroth's mortal army. Saltillion needed to find this thing for himself, hold it in his hands, so that he might understand and even use it against Deravron. The remainder of the passage suggested immense, even unlimited arcane power, enough to make Saltillion salivate merely in reading it. Saltillion suspected that once he understood the nature of the spell, or item being worked, that he would be able to wield it without much difficulty, such was his confidence in his own powers. There was no thing ever created by gods or men that he doubted could be his. Saltillion settled back in his chair and sighed in contentment. All he had to do was find Edge. Perhaps he might even coerce him to aid in the search for the Twisted Spire, and once he had what he wanted, he could return him to Wolfbane. If he was unwilling to return, well, Saltillion would just cripple him, and then he would have Raymir to himself. The hunt would last a very brief period either way, of that Saltillion was certain, and then he could fabricate the difficulties of finding Edgewolf Elvak and explain how he stumbled onto Deravron's plan, and just let it fall into his hands. It was a brilliant idea, if he'd ever had one. Saltillion fingered the runes in his staff nervously as he thought. He adorned his 32-year-old frame with as many trappings and signs of his power as possible, perhaps beyond what was necessary. Always he felt the need to show others his strength, to make clear his station in life. Saltillion was only comfortable when he felt people saw his status clearly, understood his authority to command them. Even as a young man, he'd wanted to gain the prestige he thought he deserved. In adulthood, he had climbed out of the pit of his youth through diligence and study, yet his success did not make women find his spindly frame, thin face, and sunken eyes any less unattractive. Saltillion had never bothered to try to explain that his physical appearance came from studying magic texts in the wee hours of the night, and that he ate only when he was about to keel over from lack of sustenance. Sultan had long known he would never be the fighter revered in the Napoleon histories, but he had enjoyed watching many who aspired to that archetype die, withering slowly under the effects of some of his most disturbing incantations. Yet the mage did share one trait with the Napoleons. A tenacity for glory had taken hold of him from his youth. Sultan was determined to outdo all others in success and fame, and now he felt close to that goal. Straightening, the wizard grabbed a small set of saddlebags from his wall hooks and quickly filled them with whatever scrolls he thought might be useful, folding the slip of stolen paper into one of his many hidden pockets. Gripping his staff tightly, he strode out into the library and down the spiraling stairs to the entry hall. The guards saluted him as he passed the main entrance, though not as smartly as they might have had he been one of the other commanders. One day I'll make them grovel at my feet, he thought. The idea made him smile slightly, which was not a pleasant sight. Once outside, he headed for the parade grounds where he could see Valissa working her soldiers into the ground in shifts. She shrieked out commands if they did not move swiftly enough to suit her, which they never did. Sultan walked up behind her and waited. Valissa never took her eyes from the soldiers as she addressed him. "What do you want, wizard? I'm busy here. I require some of your soldiers and horses." She turned to glare at him, then glanced at his staff and the silver runes of his dark purple robe and thought the better of what she had wanted to say. "I'll send you 12 of the best as soon as they are done here, with horses. Is that acceptable?" She ground out the last word as though it pained her. As long as they are not overworked," Sultan snorted. Valissa's glare sharpened, but she turned away. "1 hour, mage." Sultan inclined his head at her back. "As you say, woman." He grinned as her stance stiffened, confident in his own safety under Wolfbane's orders. Sultan would let her keep him waiting, but he refused to be lowered too far without taking her down with him. Still smiling sickly to himself, he headed toward the stables to retrieve his own horse. "It will be a long journey, girl," he thought, "but when I return, I'll teach you who truly rules here." The staff flared with a bright light as arcane energy coursed through his body. Feeling the ripple of the arcane potency further emboldened Sultan's arrogance as he threw open the barn doors. Sultan snapped at the stableman as he entered. "Saddle my horse, boy, and make certain he's fit for riding when you do." He enjoyed the way the man scampered under his eyes. In his mind, glorious visions of servants fearfully doing his every bidding danced before him. "One day they will all serve me," he thought, and a chilling laugh escaped his lips. All right, so that is Chapter 7, and hopefully at some point this weekend, I'll try to get Chapter 8 up on the video as well for Twitch. I don't know if anybody is in chat. I can hang on for a minute, but it's actually really hot in here, and I may just end the video and wait and see if anybody poses questions later. But thanks for checking this out. Again, you can find the book on Amazon. If you are interested in following me on Twitter, you can at Legacy Chronicle. And I posted my email at the start of this video. If you want to email me questions or anything else, you can go ahead and do that too. Thank you for listening. This should be up on YouTube shortly.